just isn't the traditional Dungeons and Dragons, which you have no doubt heard of.
Just recently acquired this really cool Mattel Electronics
Dungeons Dragons Computer
Labyrinth game.
The darkness surrounds you. Cold stone walls rise around you. The only sound is your footsteps echoing through the empty corridors. You don't know where you are. You don't know what is waiting for you. And that's what makes it exciting. But then you hear something, not in front of you, but behind the walls. Something is moving. You grip your sword and continue deeper into the dungeon. 1 step, 2 steps. A hidden chamber appears. Inside, a treasure chest. But as you reach for it, you realize you're not alone. The king of the dungeon was waiting. This is the kind of adventure players have imagined for generations. A world filled with monsters, magic, and endless possibilities. But this adventure wasn't created by a game engine, it was created by a team of developers. And it wasn't controlled by another player sitting behind a screen. It came from a board game released in 1980. A game that tried to answer an impossible question. What if you could play Dungeons and Dragons without a dungeon master? To understand why anyone would even attempt this, we have to go back to the beginning. The year is 1974. A small group of game designers released something unlike anything that came before it. Dungeons and Dragons. A game where players didn't just move pieces around on a board, they became the heroes. Instead of following a fixed story, players could enter a world limited only by their imagination. A warrior could fight a dragon, a wizard could discover forbidden magic, a group of friends could create an adventure that had never existed before.
No! That didn't come from the troglodytes, no, that came from something else. The Demogorgon!
We're in deep shit.
Will, your action! I don't know. Fireball!
They'd
have to roll a 13 or higher.
Too risky. Cast a protection spell.
Don't be a pussy.
But that freedom came with a price. Someone had to make it all work. The Dungeon Master was the storyteller, the referee, the person who controlled the monsters, designed the world, and decided what happened next. You could say they were the computer running the entire game, before computers could do it. And by the late 1970s, Dungeons & Dragons was becoming a phenomenon. What started as a niche hobby among tabletop gamers spread into schools, universities, and basements across America. For many players, it was more than just a game. It was an escape, a chance to become someone else, to explore worlds where anything was possible. But not everyone saw it that way. To some parents, Dungeons & Dragons represented something dangerous. The game got caught in the middle of the Satanic Panic, a wave of fear that connected fantasy, heavy metal, and role-playing games with something darker.
I believe the game has been involved in a number of murders and suicides across the United States, and it was revealed the accused had been playing the game for 18 months, had in fact been a dungeon master of his own group for 5 months.
But while some adults worried about the worlds players were creating, a whole generation of kids wanted more. More monsters, more adventures, more Dungeons and Dragons. And that meant more ways to experience it. Because the biggest obstacle wasn't always the rules, it was getting the adventure started. You needed a dungeon master, someone willing to spend hours behind the screen while everyone else went on their quest. And this is where Mattel saw an opportunity. In the late 1970s, Mattel was already one of the biggest toy companies in the world. They created some of the most recognizable toys of the era. But the company was looking towards the future. Electronics were becoming smaller, cheaper, and more exciting. Video games were proving that machines could react to players, they could facilitate challenges, they could make you feel like you were interacting with someone alive. So, Mattel asked a fascinating question. What if we could combine the imagination of Dungeons & Dragons with the power of electronics? In the 1980s, video games were starting to create digital worlds, but they lived inside arcades. Big machines, big screens. Mattel wanted something different. A small electronic brain that could hide inside a board game. And they found the perfect piece of technology, a tiny 4-bit microcontroller from Texas Instruments. A chip designed for simple electronic devices like calculators and appliances, not a powerful computer, not something built to create entire worlds. But one programmer realized it could do something unexpected. It could remember. It could generate a hidden maze. It could track the location of a monster. It could create rules that the players couldn't see. The chip didn't understand adventure. It didn't know what a dungeon was. But it could create something almost as important. The feeling that something was waiting for you in the dark. And that was enough. Because inside this plastic castle, Mattel had hidden their first attempt at a digital dungeon master.
Open your mind to new Dungeons Dragons computer game from Mattel Electronics. It will lead your imagination down a dungeon labyrinth wherein lies the dragon's treasure. Steal his treasure, but make no false moves. For in Dungeons & Dragons, a dead end is a dead end. New Dungeons & Dragons from Mattel Electronics.
At first glance, there's almost nothing here. No dungeon, no monsters, no maze, just a plastic board and a few pieces. But that's because the dungeon hasn't been discovered yet. The first thing you do is you choose your secret room, your safe haven. A place only you know. You touch one of the red spaces and the dungeon remembers. From here, every step matters. You move one square at a time, listening, exploring, trying to uncover a world you can't actually see. Then, a wall. Your journey ends immediately. You place one of the orange walls between the two squares. For the first time, the invisible dungeon becomes just a little more visible. Every wall you discover is another piece of the maze revealed, and slowly, the empty board transforms into your dungeon. Not because the board is changing, but because your understanding of it is. And somewhere, hidden in the darkness, treasure awaits. But you're not the only one looking for it. There's also a dragon. At the beginning of the game, you don't know where it is. Then suddenly, a sound. The dragon has awakened. You still can't see it, but now you know one thing. It's close. Somewhere within 3 spaces in a straight line. Not where, just close. So the players do something clever. They place the dragon miniature where they think the dragon might be. But it's only a guess. In reality, the dragon could be here, or here, or here. Only the dungeon knows. And from this moment on, every step becomes a gamble, because after every move you make, the dragon moves too. Always hunting the nearest adventurer. Until eventually, your paths cross. If the dragon catches you, you're thrown all the way back to your secret room, and only then do you finally discover where it was hiding all along. Only one adventurer can escape the labyrinth, and only by carrying the treasure all the way back home. Usually this is where we would tell you the success story, how many copies it sold and how it became a huge hit. But the truth is, we couldn't find those numbers. And the game itself was never a massive success Mattel probably had hoped for. It was an ambitious experiment, a strange mix between a board game and an electronic toy that couldn't fully live up to the imagination of Dungeons & Dragons. But decades later, something unexpected happened.
It just isn't the traditional Dungeons and Dragons, which you have no doubt heard of.
Just recently acquired this really cool Mattel Electronics
Dungeons & Dragons Computer
Labyrinth game.
The game found a new audience. Complete copies became sought-after collector's items, not just because they were rare, but because, when you actually play it, you realize how ambitious the idea really was. In 1980s, Mattel had built a machine that could hide a dungeon, track a monster, and create an adventure without a dungeon master. It couldn't create the worlds we later would experience in games like Diablo, World of Warcraft, or Tomb Raider, but it was experimenting with the same basic idea. What if the game itself could create the adventure? Mattel didn't create the perfect digital dungeon master. The technology wasn't ready, but maybe they didn't need to. Because the most important part of every adventure was never the machine. It was always the imagination of the player.